Next is Senate Bill number 516 by Senator Euer.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Coyne. And I also want to acknowledge and recognize my colleagues who have bills that are taking on many of these ideas, including Chair Coyne, Chair Sosnowski. I believe actually Senator Dela Cruz's bill about the changing the election date as well is similar concept. I think different approach on all of these. I really appreciate the opportunity for this conversation because really elections being the cornerstone of our democracy, making sure that they're safe, secure, and freely accessible to the people is really critical. The more voters who participate in elections, the better our representation is. We've now held 4 successful elections during the pandemic with various changes that have made voting safer, more accessible, and secure. This legislation is seeking to codify those changes into law and then also make several technical changes to allow for those larger changes. So many of the things that are covered in this bill have already been discussed among individual legislation that was introduced before, one of which being the new primary date. I believe my legislation moves it a little bit earlier than Senator Dela Cruz's, and she's right on the money. The issue with the municipalities is a big one. It's a big cost from the municipalities. Also, though, Rhode Island's primary is the latest in the country, and this bill would move it earlier. That would also give us more time to make sure that we can get our ballots to our overseas military personnel in a timely manner. This also would remove the witness requirements, which we've discussed already, and it would allow early voting. It would also allow for an online mail ballot request and create a permanent mail ballot list. I mean, and those are things that it definitely came up as points of discussion. I know that there was a lot of discussion about mail ballots, and folks really liked that option. And being able to vote from the safety and security of their home, being able to take time with their ballots, being able to research candidates while they had their ballot in front of them, and not feeling the pressure of having to make a decision while they're standing there in the voting booth. So providing those opportunities for expanded mail ballot access. To go along with that, to also have there be, the mail ballot drop boxes. So that was something that got added in primarily by executive action through the Board of Elections and in cooperation with the Board of Canvassers, but this would make those drop boxes permanent. And then the other thing is that this also has elements in it to have a rigorous voter registration list. That's a topic that's heavily politicized throughout the country. And the reality is that in order to make sure that our voter list is maintained, we need to have a process and procedure to address that issue on a more frequent basis. So this bill would require the Secretary of State to cross-check the voter file at least 4 times per year. And it implements a new process to automatically update records when a voter address is changed. The piece about the mail ballot specifically and the early voting, one of the things that, as I mentioned, we did have this emergency voting and prior to COVID, but prior to COVID, we basically had what a lot of folks refer to as just a no excuse emergency voting system. But what that actually was is that when you went in and you said, okay, I might not be here on election day, so I've got to fill out this application. What you really were doing is you were signing an application, an emergency ballot application, and I believe it was under penalty of perjury that you had to check a box and say, I am not going to be here, or I don't believe I'm going to be here on election day, and I didn't find out that I wasn't going to be here on election day until after the time period of the mail ballots closed. What that does is that's not an open early voting process. It does make people, even though it's kind of considered a no excuse, and I'm not aware of clerks sitting there and asking people for proof of any travel certificates. The reality is that there is an excuse required, and residents are required to sign that under penalty of perjury. So it's not just the same as saying, okay, 20 days before election, we're going to have the town hall open for anybody who wants to come in. There were specific parameters for the emergency voting provisions that people had to attest to, and that was actually somewhat of a point of contention as this issue has been discussed over the years. So there really would be a difference between just calling it early voting, having it be early voting, because those excuse requirements were suspended by executive order during the course of the pandemic. So this bill would basically be codifying the access and the opportunity that voters had during the pandemic for early voting without having to sign an affidavit to do so. So again, this is a pretty lengthy bill, and so encompasses a lot of the topics that were discussed on earlier pieces of legislation. I'm happy to field any questions. I also have been working with a coalition of voting rights and voting security experts, I believe some of which who are testifying tonight. So that being said, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Euer. Any questions or comments from committee members? I believe we have quite a few witnesses to testify on that particular bill. Thank you.